Welcome back to the Marketer of the Day podcast, and I have an important question for you. Do you have a software product or a software service and you need to get more of the word out there? You need to get a jump on your competitors. You would love it if someone came to your site and browsed your blog and found out all kinds of features and new things you were adding to your software. Would you love it if someone could jump on YouTube and search the name of your software product and see just all the features and all the things that they can do? Well, if so, or if you would like that in the future, you're in exactly the right place. We're here with Karl Hughes. He is a former software engineer. He is a CTO who now runs Draft.dev, which is a specialized content marketing agency that helps companies reach software developers. Exciting stuff. Karl, glad to be talking to you.
Yeah, good to talk to you, Robert.
And so yeah, what do we need to know about this whole service you provide and about creating content for software products?
Yeah, so I was a software developer, as you mentioned, for a number of years. And one thing I noticed was that a lot of companies are just kind of bad at getting in front of software engineers and to sell products. So there's an increasing number of tools being marketed at developers these days. And the challenge that every company has is how do we market at developers in a way that's genuinely helpful and educational without being overly pushy and salesy? Because developers hate things like cold emails and really spammy pop-ups and stuff like that maybe some industries of marketing or some parts of marketing get into. So what we do at Draft.dev is just educational content focused for software engineers by software engineers. So to give you a really tangible example, let's say that you are a web hosting company and you want software developers to deploy their products, their web applications, their mobile applications out to your service. How are you going to reach these software engineers? And one of the ways you can do it is content. And that's what we write. So we'll write detailed tutorials with code samples, lots of use cases, different ways that software developers can integrate tools together to help them build things faster and better. And so it's just really helpful content written by developers who are out there using products for companies that want to reach them.
Well, it sounds like software companies all over need this kind of thing. But what would you say if someone said, well, our team, they're the coders, that they make it, they support it, they maintain it, and no one else knows enough to make these tutorials or write these code samples. So how dare you even suggest that some outside party write this content? What would you say to someone like that?
I would say if your developers who have a full-time job building the product also want to have many hours a week writing blog posts and they don't mind, then go for it. By all means. I think it's a great way to go. What happens though is as you scale content production, you're going to run into those practical limits. So like how much your software developers can write. And then the question becomes, do we want to limit ourselves to the content we can produce in-house, or do we need to start looking outside? So what we do is actually modeled after what a lot of really big companies like DigitalOcean, Okta, and Venmo, places like that have developer community writing programs. So they've already got these programs, basically like what we do at Draft.dev, but they're at this big scale. So we take those programs and we sort of slice them up in a way that smaller, mid-sized companies can afford and can bolt this on as community-driven engineering content for their blog.
And so you're mentioning about these things like, scaling up, ramping up. Is there an approximate ballpark of how much content a company should be busting out? And I know that's kind of like a weird question, and it might be like on a case-by-case basis, but sometimes I wonder, should there be something every day, every week? Like how much is enough or too much as far as putting out this content?
So I'll give you a personal opinion. I think every week is kind of a baseline for good content marketing. I think some smaller companies can get away with less because they don't have the budget or they're not really sure how they're going to promote content. But to be honest, at least once a week. We have clients doing anywhere from one piece a week to 20 pieces a month. And so it kind of depends how competitive the other people targeting the same areas of content are and how much content you can produce at a high quality within your budget. So I don't think there's like a one answer to that question. It's probably it depends, like any good question. But at the same time, I do think there's kind of a good baseline of probably getting a piece of content every week is going to make a lot of difference in search engines and with just staying consistent for your audience.
Yeah, fair enough. And I think that having that once a week sort of rhythm, it helps just get your mind wrapped around it. Because I don't know about you, Karl, but if I'm even thinking about a piece of content every day and like 30 days of content or 90 days of content, I'm thinking like, I'm so overwhelmed. I think to myself, like, well, if we have a bunch of ideas, like half of them will suck, or we won't even have enough like meat on the bone to create that, and we'll just be putting out like little bits of things, and that won't be very good. But when you're saying one piece of content per week, it seems like you can kind of wrap your head around, okay, that's sort of like a mini launch kind of thing there. Like you can look at some ideas on this day and come up with a rough draft on that day and put it on that day and work on the marketing and the traffic. It seems like a little more logical, easier to get our head wrapped around when we think about these weekly blocks. And so then to the kind of another loaded question is, when you say a piece of content, I know it can mean a lot of different things, but like, is it typically like these super long blog posts with like it's so long it needs a table of contents? Or are we talking about like videos in between? When you say a piece of content, what are we talking about?
Yeah, again, the answer is it depends, of course. But I do think the internet has standardized, at least around most content being a roughly like 1,500 word piece of written content, with probably a mix of 3 to 5 images, videos, and other graphics to support it. That's kind of how we standardize. Now, at the same time, there are certain topics that require a lot more than 1,500 words, and some topics may not require quite that same amount. So I don't think it's necessarily like, I actually think word count is less important. It's more about covering the topic in a way that is helpful to the end reader who's trying to get something out of this. So if they're looking up what's the definition of a term, you don't need to give them 3,000 words to define a term. But at the same time, like if there's more that they're looking to learn, like if they're trying to get an in-depth tutorial for how to scale up their Python applications, you do need to cover that with enough detail. So there might be a 3,000 word piece there. So yeah, it does depend. We end up kind of having some standard lengths, and then clients come in with their own thoughts, and we sort of work with them to figure out what makes sense for each piece.
Well, fair enough. So you're saying that 1,500 words, even though that's not the box we're trapping ourselves in, that's a good starting point. That's kind of the baseline of what people think about when they think about content. But then again, start from there, and then case by case basis as far as what needs to be done. But you're also saying it's not just about the word length, because who needs someone pontificating for 1,500 words just to explain one term when you can say it in just a couple of sentences? And so the next thing that makes me think of it, based on your answer there, is I'm thinking about, okay, what's the importance of like having this whole dedicated team such as yours to do things instead of doing things in-house? And there's always that problem, especially with software, of things going out of date, right? Like even when we look on YouTube for like a tutorial on how to do this, I'm like, okay, if this one says like this year versus like when they put the year in the title, I'm like, if it says blah blah blah, WordPress tutorial 2025, I'm going to click on that versus like 2015, right? So is there any of that in the strategy, like updating things for like new versions of the software or like new technology, and going back and like making the old content fresh again?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a few different kind of points to mention here. So one is, a lot of times in any sort of technical content, you are competing with existing pieces of content out there on the internet, whether it's for things to be shared on social or it's through Google and search results. So what you want to look at is, like, if your competitors wrote a big guide to something, but it's 4 years old now, that's a great opportunity for you to come in with something much more current, because in 4 years, the tools that software developers use change pretty in pretty big ways. The other thing, so yeah, that's just keeping an eye on like what's out there and how your content can be better. But then your internal content also does need to be updated. This is something we do with a lot of clients, is they may have written an article several years ago that they're like starting to see that drop off in traffic on, and they're saying, could we update this to the latest version of Java or PHP or whatever, because it's kind of fallen out of favor with the internet now. So absolutely important to keep that stuff up to date. Another reason that you look at outside writers for content, whether it's with us or you build a community writing program or you hire freelancers or whatever, is that a lot of times companies will have an internal developer team that knows, let's say your internal developers know JavaScript and Python really well, but they don't know Go, they don't know Rust, they don't know Swift, and there's like dozens of other programming languages they may not have any knowledge about, but you want to write on those topics. What do? You can either hire 1 million engineers to cover all those topics, which is really expensive, or you can start to work with freelancers, outsiders to do that stuff. So a lot of times that's a really helpful use case for bringing in outside help for technical content like we do.
And you mentioned this whole idea of bringing in outside writers to kind of like cover more bases versus what your internal team does. And you mentioned here about this idea of, well, even if your competitor has this really popular blog post, this really popular topic, don't despair, because maybe their content is 5 years out of date and you can do a better version that's in the current date. And you even mentioned near the beginning there of talking about how your software integrates with other systems, because that's such a thing now these days with, like, things in the cloud and things like that. So like what sort of like marketing or like promotional strategies such as these present themselves with software writing that we don't normally see anywhere else? Because, like, I mean, my brain's already on fire with all these kind of ideas that you've just offhandedly skated past. So I'm already excited.
Yeah. So let's take something really tangible. And again, if you're not a software developer, I'm going to try to keep this high level enough that you can follow along. I don't want to get too in the weeds here. But when you're a software developer and you want to push code to a server, to a web host that's going to hold that code for you and run it on the internet, there's a lot of steps that go into it. There's these tools called CI/CD platforms. So it's continuous integration, continuous deployment platforms. There are testing platforms. There are linting platforms. I know none of these words mean anything, but it doesn't matter. The point is there's several different services that usually touch code before it goes out to a server live. And what's interesting, if you're a web host and you're trying to write good content around how developers can use your web hosting service, you kind of need to write all these different integrations and best practices for using these other tangentially related tools, because that's going to help developers and customers when they come to you and say, look, we want to use your host, but we're not sure if it integrates with Jira in the way that we want it to. So those kinds of questions are going to come up, and that's where content can really help you sort of like push past those objections. So that's kind of more, this is kind of touching into bottom and middle of funnel content, which is, one great use case, but it could also be that these integration guys help with some top of funnel reach if software developers are often searching for how to integrate Jira with my web hosting platform or something similar.
And so that's just seems like a good starting point in general of, if we're saying, well, what kind of content do we want, and what like should that library be, and like thinking of ideas. It's just like, okay, if someone wanted to use my web host with this tool, there we go. Like just combine these two things, and there's a tutorial, there's a piece of content. And so what is sort of the research process like this? Is it a matter of like you ask your client what they want written about? Is it a matter of like going deep on the help desk, going on the internet, looking at competitors, all of the above? Like what's sort of the method to the madness as far as coming up with all these ideas? Because with content, it's like you always need to be churning them out, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, like we've said, if you're going to write a piece every week, then that means every year you got to come up with 52 new topics, right? And that is a pretty high load, especially when you're talking about technical content in a specific vertical or niche or little, small area. There's a few things that we see clients doing that we do with clients. One is you can take the keyword research-based approach, where you say, like, what would developers in our space be searching for? You try to look for lots of different keywords and then come up with some that have some high search volume and low keyword difficulty. I personally use Ahrefs, but there's other tools that are great out there to do this. So whatever you want, that's one approach. Another one is to go to developer communities, say Reddit, subreddits that are focused on software engineering, or Stack Overflow, different Slack groups focused on different kinds of engineering. Hacker News is a big one with developers. You go to those communities and you see what people are talking about within your area, your vertical. That's a really helpful way to figure out what the community has lots of discussions around and what kind of things fire up engineers. And then another thing to do is exactly what you mentioned with talking to your support and sales teams and seeing what questions come up from customers all the time that could we address with content. And this is usually good for bottom of funnel, kind of crossing people over conversions. A lot of times I encourage really early stage companies that aren't sure about SEO or top of funnel yet, like maybe just start by talking to your customers and seeing if you can build some content that pushes them over the edge and into a sale, because that'll show some early wins with your content that are directly related to revenue, or maybe you upsell clients based on the content or something like that. And a lot of times if you're a content marketer, that can be helpful to kind of get more buy-in from upper management about how we do content more and get more budget for it.
So many ideas. And what I'm hearing is that there's the data side of it, and there's the judgment side of it, right? There's the judgment is going out and seeing what there is, but you also mentioned like keyword tools, and you also mentioned a little bit earlier about the like monitoring the traffic, and if something is really popular, create more of that. If something was popular and it has gone down in the clicks, then you say, well, we need to figure out why that is, or is this going out of favor? Does this need to be like updated, refined, something like that? And so is this is that like part of like an ongoing process as far as what your team provides? Because when you imagine content creation, it's easy to just be short-sighted and say, oh, I just write a bunch of stuff and publish it. But is there like an ongoing like kind of like monitoring that happens after all this?
That's a great question. We don't provide that right now today. We stay pretty execution focused. And so typically clients have their own internal marketing teams that are setting strategy, keeping track of analytics, and they're relying on us as essentially their content engine, just producing the content they need or updates they need and things like that. So that's our current model today. But I do know that a lot of SEO agencies or just content agencies generally will focus on like keeping up with each piece of content and tracking it over time. We do this internally for our own content for draft.dev on our blog. So like we have a big list of that we audit every 3 to 6 months of each piece of content, make sure we haven't seen traffic dip. We'll add internal backlinks to it. We'll look for opportunities to ask for backlinks other places. We'll also get into like re-promoting content every few months. So this is another great thing. Like we talked a bit about how like it's nice to think of your content and here's a piece of content 1 week, and then we're going to spend a couple of days promoting it. Yeah, I think that's absolutely key to making a piece of content stand out, is investing a day or two or some time in making sure people know about it, putting it out into the right places, social media, and reaching out to newsletters and asking them to promote it for you if it's really good, things like that. But you can do that every 2 or 3 months. You don't have to do it just once to a piece of content and be done with it. I think that's a huge oversight from a lot of content teams that are out there trying to promote stuff. It's just doing it once instead of continuing to hit it every few months.
Well, this is great. I mean, I'm getting, like you said, there's the focus on exactly your business, Karl, and your type of client, but there's also kind of more of the high level kind of in general, like content marketing things to think of. Even if someone's not a direct exact fit for you and your team, it's still good to get educated, right? I mean, it's kind of like practicing what you preach. You're all about the tutorial videos and saying, we want to educate you about how to use this and that feature. So that way, if you're almost using it, or almost using the software, this pushes you over the edge. If you were frustrated with our software, guess what? There's this feature that you might not have known about, or maybe this gets you to use it more, or upgrade to a bigger plan, or use it with more users in your organization. There's so many cool things to think about. And I mean, that right there, that little tip about go back a few months later and consider re-promoting something old. I mean, such a simple idea, but it's so easy to forget because with all this content marketing stuff, there's like 35 things always happening. And it's easy to just like remember like 4 or 5 things, but there's like so many little plates to be spinning, I guess. I feel like I've thrown out like 27 different metaphors in our conversation, but it just kind of makes it fun to think of it that way. And so so I want to make sure that we plug you and your company, and that way we talk to exactly the right people we want to talk to. So it's good to be educated about, content marketing, and that, teams can look at your product or your software and, do all these amazing things for you. But as far as draft.dev, who should be listening to your message exactly? What type of company, and what should they be doing as far as contacting you and taking the next step here?
Yeah, sure. So we work almost exclusively with developer tools companies or API driven companies that have an API they want developers to integrate with. Usually our main contact is a head of content or a head of developer marketing or developer relations, depending on how big the company is. We work with mostly startups in Series A and Series B range. So a lot of companies that are out there in the Kubernetes space these days. Data engineering is really big these days. There's a lot of low-code tools we're also starting to work with. So anything in that sphere we can probably help with. And if you're not sure, I'm always happy to hop on a call and maybe refer you off to somebody else, because I end up getting to know a lot of people in the B2B marketing space just through running this agency. So you can find out more at draft.dev. And my email is Karl, Karl at draft.dev. Feel free to shoot me a mail or book a call with me there on the website. And either way, looking forward to hearing feedback from people.
Well, I'm looking forward for you, if that is a thing. Karl with a K at draft.dev. The website is draft.dev. And as we completely wrap up our conversation here, Karl, do you have any final parting words of advice or any little nuggets you felt like we left out?
No, with content, I just say to people, just get started. And if you're a founder of a small company, you're just trying to get something going. I mean, try to get yourself on a cadence of writing 1 blog post a month, just to kind of expose your worldview, talk about what your business does a little, and then get into the optimization later. It's just important to get started. So have fun with it and get into trying it. You'll learn as you go.